Welcome back. It's great to see you. I see a number of friendly not old faces. Only my face has gotten known. Let me just really quickly get a sense for what years we have represented, with the understanding that the year that you graduated isn't necessarily correlated with age. So how many people are here from within the last 5 years? So to two, great. And what about between 2000 and 2005? Welcome. What about, I'm going to go in smaller increments here, about 1997 to 2000? I know you guys. What about 93 to 96? You go, I recognize you guys. And now we're before my time. I came in 93. So how many people are like from the early 90s? How about in the 80s? Oh, welcome. That's great. Tom. And what about the 70s? These are the really young folks. Great. And the 60s? Anyone earlier than that? From? 58. Thank you for coming. That's awesome. That's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for coming. We are having a great time here at the Haas School. Things just, as if they weren't good enough when you were here, they're even better now. We're having a fantastic time, and Dean Lyons is doing just a wonderful job in inspiring us and moving us to the next level. And one of the things that we're squarely focusing on is leadership and innovation. And so I'm thrilled to have a chance to talk to you just a bit about some of the things that we all have been thinking about. As you might imagine, this is an enormous topic area, and as you know me, if you know me, I'm a very ambitious person. So I have probably about 5 days worth of material to go through today in our, I don't know, I think we have 60 minutes together. So I'm going to try a couple things in the spirit of innovation and see how far we get. But just so you know, there's a lot to talk about here, and the hardest challenge I had was to figure out which piece of it we would be able to start to think about today. So forgive me if we didn't find your favorite piece, but hopefully it will still be fun. Okay, so 3 questions. Why is innovation important? We're going to start by talking about that. Second, what are the keys to cultivating innovation? And we're actually going to get pretty specific in this, and we're going to talk about some tactical options that you have to cultivate innovation within your organizations and your teams. We're going to talk a little bit about what creativity is. We're going to talk about one of the most heavily used ways of cultivating creativity. We're going to talk a little bit about implementation, and then we're going to roll it back up and talk about a culture of innovation, which is probably the most lasting way of instilling your organization with the capacity for innovation. So I started getting interested in this because most of my work has been focused on looking at organizational culture and using organizational culture as a leadership tool. And in my work in that over the last 20 years, started when I was 4, in my work on that, what we've found with colleagues of mine at various other universities that will remain unnamed, we found that most organizations can be profiled on a set of cultural attributes. And we found that this list is rather limited, right? That there are a set of key attributes that matter a lot in organizations. And what you can do is look across organizations and actually profile them along these dimensions. But what we found was that one of these dimensions was more important than all the rest if you looked at long-term financial performance across long periods of time. And that was the first one, which had to do with promoting innovation and change. And so one of the best long-term studies that has been done up to a couple of years ago showed that even when organizations did a great job of cultivating a culture that was relevant to its strategy, so your Southwest and your culture focuses on keeping costs low, right? That's strategically relevant. Even when you got that right, and when the culture was strong and people would do the culturally appropriate things even when no one told them that they needed to, Organizations didn't benefit financially from those cultural attributes unless they also had a built-in capacity for innovation and change. And just to give you a flavor for what some of those numbers look like, because they're pretty striking in their differences, this was a study done by John Cotter and Jim Heskett out of Harvard a couple of years ago. And what they did was they tracked 200 Fortune 500 firms over an 11-year period. And they found that, and I very much simplified their data, I basically put the ones that got the culture right into this column, and the ones who missed on any one of those 3 cultural attributes in this column, right? So what they found was significant differences in performance across the 11-year period. So the organizations that were strategically aligned with a strong culture that was focused on innovation had 682% revenue growth over the 11-year period versus 166%. Huge workforce expansion, big stock price increase, right? So you can tell which decade the study was done in, right? Big net income increase. And so this, I thought, was quite dramatic. And in fact, one of the things that I'm doing now is we're actually looking at high-tech firms in particular, my colleagues and I. And some of you may even have gotten a request to participate in this study. And if you did, and you did, thank you. But what we're finding is that having a culture of innovation is actually buffering firms from economic volatility. It's actually a way of preventing being as vulnerable to, in particular, this economic downturn. So I'm convinced, right, this is important. I'm convinced that we need to figure out how to make it work. So the question then is, what do we mean by innovation? Well, you know, from my perspective as an organizational researcher, I think that innovation involves sort of 2 separate components. One is coming up with good ideas, cultivating good ideas, and the second is getting them implemented, right? And it turns out that if you take as a definition of creativity a kind of novelty and usefulness, that you actually get pretty precise in what you think about as creativity. So it can focus on doing old things in new ways. It could focus on process improvement. When we talk about it in the creativity literature, we can talk about a dimension from conservative to creative, right? How novel is it? We can talk about how realistic versus idealistic it is, how useful it is. And what we're looking for is this sweet spot up in the northeast corner of creative realism. So the question becomes, right, how do we make that happen? And if you were to trot across the campus to our wonderful psychology department, which houses a number of psychologists who are steeped in the literature of personality psychology, what they would say to you is, well, that's easy. You want to be more creative, you just need to hire more creative people, right? It's very simple, very simple. And they would show you data that says that when people's skills overlap with their passions, they're more likely to be creative, when they have an optimal amount of expertise. When they've developed a certain set of personal characteristics, they're more likely to be creative. But here in this last part is when I start getting a little bit suspicious, despite the fact that I was a psychology major as an undergraduate here at Berkeley. I get a little skeptical because I look at those attributes and I say, well, wait a minute, what you're talking about independence, self-discipline, tolerance for ambiguity, perseverance. These are characteristics that have to do with your ability to withstand the criticism that comes along with trying to be creative. And underscoring this point was a neat study done at Harvard by Professor Teresa Amabile, where she did the following. She went into a set of product development firms. So say we're all part of this organization. And today is my day to pitch to you the new product idea. So I'm pitching the idea, and you all are giving me some feedback, and we're talking about it. What Amabile did was she invited the rest of you to come along and observe these meetings. And at the end of the meeting, she asked the observers a bunch of questions. One of the most interesting questions that she asked was to please rate the intelligence level of every person in the meeting. So guess whose intelligence was rated the lowest every single time? Right? It couldn't be you, right? Right? The presenter, the person pitching the new idea. What? I don't get it, right? I'm the one doing all the work. Well, think about what our conversation sounds like. So I'm saying we could try this, we could try that, and you're saying, hasn't worked before, way too expensive, too risky, are you kidding me? Did you take your medication this morning, right? I mean, right? They sound brilliant, I sound like a raving lunatic. And so really, the question around creativity is not whether you have people with creative ideas in your organization. I guarantee you that you do. I guarantee it. And I guarantee that every single person has at least one idea about how something could be done better within the organization. The question is, are they willing to say it out loud? And that's where you come in, right? Leaders set the context for creativity by developing practices and tactics and norms that enable people to express their creative ideas out loud. So, we're going to try one today. And again, this is an exercise I do with our MBAs in the core class. We usually take a whole class period to do it, and so it's going to be really raucous and wild in here, because I'm going to give you, since you're alumni, you already have the knowledge, so I'm going to give you 1/5 the time that I give our MBAs who are still learning how to do this. So we're going to talk about brainstorming. And how many of you have ever used brainstorming? Right, so this is actually one of the most popular tactics for instilling creativity, and we're going to evaluate what we think about it. It was developed by Alex Osborne, who was an advertising executive, and it in fact is the most widespread tactic used out there. And the goal is really to maximize, in particular, the quantity of output, right? Quantity of ideas, right? And the idea is that somehow quantity is going to be a good predictor of quality. The other goal is to actually get people in a conversation where you are inspired in a way that when you hear someone else say something, it actually sparks an idea in your head, okay? So here's the deal. Brainstorming rules are quite important, so I want you to try to pay attention to these because you're going to engage in a brainstorming activity. The first one is expressiveness. All ideas should be articulated no matter how strange or fanciful, right? And remember, maybe you won't come back for 5 years, so people will forget by then what you said, right? The second is no evaluation, right? No censoring, no evaluation or judgment or criticism of ideas. All ideas are considered valuable. More is better, so let them come out. And building, all ideas belong to the group rather than to an individual. Use other people's ideas to trigger new insights. Okay, so those you want to keep in mind, and I'll post those back when we get going. Okay, so here are the instructions. So you're a member of a new product development team at Haas Inc. And you develop concept designs for improving existing products and developing entirely new products. Your goal is to come up with as many original designs as possible that are potentially feasible for clients. And today you're going to have a specific client, and I'm going to give you that assignment in a moment. So the design engineers at Haas Inc. use brainstorming to develop new product ideas. After a client has contacted Haas Inc. and described their needs, a brainstorming session is scheduled among a group of 6 engineers to discuss the client's problem or idea and to come up with an array of viable design concepts. After the brainstormer, fondly called BS, a list of ideas is made, again stressing quantity. So in a minute, I'm going to give you a client intake form, and this was prepared by the lead design engineer who spoke with the client. It's not necessary that your group converges on a single idea. The client at this point is really just interested in seeing a broad range, wide scope of possible ideas. You're going to have 10 minutes to develop these ideas. Hello, we're back. I'm going to randomly pick a couple of groups and ask them for some data. Let's start with this group here. We're going to call you Team 1. Can you tell us how many ideas and what your best one is? How many ideas?
Okay, so we had 17 ideas.
17.
And our best idea was a combination of many of them, beginning with a dog food that contains some kind of chemical or electronic notification that notifies these robots that roam the streets to pick up the poop, dog poop. And then every time the robot picks up some of your dog's poop, you get entered in a lottery. So you're incented to use this system. Entered in a lottery. And these robots then recycle the poop into fertilizer, which is sold as a separate business.
So,
got it?
Was there anything else to that idea?
I'm sure I left something out.
To fertilizer. All right, I think we have about as much as we need here. Okay. Is this this was the technology-enabled group, right? So let's hear from this group. How many and what's your best?
All right, we had 33 ideas.
33.
We had too many, so we had one which was a hovercraft that was going to follow the dog and pick it up, and then freeze drying it so that it was easy to pick up. What else do we have?
Wait, which one is your best?
It was hard to pick. Which one? I think we had a privacy tent to go around the dog.
A privacy tent. And how does that help pick it up, though?
Makes the dog feel better.
It makes you and the dog feel better that no one's seeing them squat.
Oh, and then you pick it up?
Then you can sort of reach in and pick it up so that.
Okay. How about all the way in the back there? You all? Yes. How many did you have?
We had only 14.
There's no such thing as only.
Well, we have, okay.
And what was your best?
You carry around a pocket full of dung beetles.
Carry around, sorry, I don't quite get it.
A pocket full of dung beetles. And then you just distribute the dung beetles appropriately.
And the beetles eat the poop?
Yeah.
Okay. In your pocket. Okay.
Simple, straightforward.
Yeah, simple, organic. Very green, one of our themes here at the Haas School. How about this group here?
We also had 14. We had 14, and our best choice was to have a special shoe that you can either grab the poop into, like by stepping on it on hard ground, or if you are on soft ground, then you can kind of push it into the ground as manure.
Push into the ground. Okay. Do we have a group that has a very different? Yeah, so how about back here? We have a hand. How many and what's your best?
We had 8 ideas, and the best one was what we think is also the simplest one, which is a biodegradable diaper for doggies.
Sorry, say again?
It's a biodegradable diaper for doggies.
Biodegradable diaper for doggies. Okay, and they wear it just during the walk.
Sorry?
Just during the walk.
Yes, just during the walk.
So then my dog would definitely want the tent. How about a couple more? Why don't we just do 2 more? Here, we have a group here. Okay.
We had 17, and our best idea was a ray gun that instantly vaporized it.
Okay. And we'll do 2 more. How about here?
We had 13 ideas. We had a disposable diaper, but the doggy poop went to a backpack on the dog, which had a tracker, which was then picked up by city employees to create jobs and taken to a central distribution point.
Backpack. What happens after the backpack?
Yeah. Washable.
And then city employees, what do they pick up?
City employees take this up as a tracker.
Oh. Pick up poop. Okay, all right. Yeah, go ahead. How many?
We had 19 ideas, and the best one was an application to geotag all the poops with subscription to a service that would come afterwards and clean it.
Okay. Service comes words and cleans it. And do we have some? I'll go all the way to 10. Yeah, go ahead. If you haven't heard an idea like yours.
We had 25 ideas, and was selected one is disintegration or petrification spray.
Or what is it called?
Disintegration or petrification spray that you spray on the poop.
Okay, and it dissolves.
Yes.
Excellent. And how about one more? Yeah.
So we had 10 ideas, and though we had the spray idea also as one of our top 2, we also chose dog training. Basically, train the dog to go and flush the toilet.
There's a YouTube waiting to happen, huh? Okay. Any other incredibly wild ideas out there that haven't been mentioned? Yeah. A core. Okay. I think we have some people who don't have dogs in the audience. All right. I should have brought you a picture. I am actually personally very interested in this. What about you? Yeah. Right here.
Yeah, we talked about a spray gun like a magic wand, which you just have a laser and you basically hit the laser on the poop and it degrades it.
Okay, so that we have something like that. Yep. So of these that you've heard, which do you think is the best? Which is the most closest to creative realism? Which do you think our client is going to be interested in pursuing? The spray. We have some votes for the spray. Let me just see a quick show of hands. I'm going to go, this is very imperfect, as you can tell. How many think one is the best? Yeah, come on. I think so. 2? How many think 2 is the best? Okay. Try to vote beyond your, what about 3? 3? So there's some, yes, there's some cross-room support for 3. What about 4? 5? 6? Ray gun? 7? 8? 9? And 10. You know, I actually, there was a lot for 3. Yeah, it was hard to tell. So usually what happens in this is that the group that develops the most ideas often develops the most creative ideas. That's the theory of brainstorming. Okay? But let me show you some interesting stuff. And by the way, maybe together and do some patenting a little bit later. Dave, can you help us out with that in the Entrepreneurship Center? Yeah. So we'll talk later. But that's usually what you. So let me just ask you a couple of theories that you have in your head. If you were to compare a nominal group, which is a group of 6 individuals working alone, right? And you would each come up with your own ideas. Did anyone do it that way, by the way? Okay. Each come up with your own ideas, and then when you get together as a group, you eliminate the redundancies and kind of go from there. That's one option. A second option is what you did, which is a real group, 6 individuals working together. Which of those do you think is going to do better in terms of quantity, quality? What do you think? Real groups. Real groups? Okay. Why? What do you think? Build on it. Yeah. Why do you think? Yeah. What do you think? A squasher, which is, yeah, fun buster. Okay? So someone who violates the brainstorming rules. Instant feedback. Okay, yeah. 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 So here's the research on this. Nominal groups develop more ideas, and they develop better ideas. God, who knew? Right? Who knew? So now this is not to say that a nominal group doesn't bring the ideas back together, but it certainly has some implications for how you want to think about a brainstorming session and how you would want to optimize that kind of brainstorming session. Yeah. Great question. So the question is, how do you evaluate creativity? Right? How do you evaluate creativity? And it turns out that there are 3 typical indicators that are used, and you tell me whether these make sense to you. One is fluency, which is literally the raw quantity. So we had one group who came up with 33 ideas, right? I don't know what that is on a per minute basis, right? Right? 3.3 ideas per minute, right? Second is flexibility, which has to do with the range or diversity of ideas in terms of categories or ideational shifts. And third is originality, which is the novelty of ideas, which could roughly be considered like which ideas are those that 5% or less of the population would come up with. So let me give you an example. What if I asked you to think about the uses for a cardboard box? And this is the kind of research that's actually been done, and these are actual real answers here. So person 1 comes up with 3 ideas: cage for a hamster, container for a turtle, or kennel for a dog. So that person would get a fluency score of 3 ideas. They would get a flexibility score of 1, right? Because all of these are homes for pets, right? It's one category and just diversity within that category. And originality, I don't know. We'd have to go and see in this frame of time, right, how novel these ideas were. Person 2 also comes up with 3 ideas: a shrine, a telephone, if you added string, as traded as currency, right? They went to Columbia MBA program, right? Right? So fluency is still 3, but now flexibility has been increased to 3. We're now talking about categories of religion, telecom, and economics, right? And I'm guessing, even though we can't, a priori decide what the originality would be, I'm guessing these are a little bit higher on originality, right? Maybe they're a little lower on realism, right? But they certainly are higher on originality. It turns out that the key for effective brainstorming is this flexibility component, right? The driver of creative inventions. And so what you want to really push for here is how many categories can you come up with? And it turns out that groups actually come up with fewer categories. So even though it feels like you're feeding off of one another as you're doing this, you're feeding off one another within category. Oh, a hamster's house. Oh, a bunny could be in there, right? Oh, we could put our chickens in the cardboard, right? So it feels like you've got lots and lots of ideas, but in fact, in terms of divergence, you're not going that wide. Did I see a hand here? Is there a question? No. Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, thank you, right? Here we have tying it back to true creative realism. Thank you, right? So then if you were to think about getting the best of both worlds, right, it turns out that one thing that groups have a hard time with is divergence. That actually groups cause a pressure towards convergence, right? And that's a social pressure, and we do it instinctively because being a member of a group is ultimately, if you take it all the way back, kind of the way we survive in the world. And the idea of somehow being excluded from the group would be very problematic. So we are often overly concerned with sticking with the group and not going too far outside of its boundaries. So the challenge then becomes, what could you do to simultaneously, right, use the idea generation function of the group, but not get caught in the convergence trap? What are some ideas that you would have?
Start with individual and then go together.
Start with individuals and then go together. Excellent idea. So spend a couple minutes quiet time just coming up with ideas. Your ideas won't be influenced by anybody else, right? And make sure that everybody has a chance to tell what their idea is, right? Not just the people who are, shall we say, comfortable speaking in groups. Like, shut up already, right? Right? Make sure everybody has a chance. What else could you do? What else could you do? Yeah. Different modes of getting their ideas out, right? So ways of stimulating idea generation, drawing things, concept design, right? Whatever mode is potentially useful for them. Template for idea categories, right? So one thing you're going to do is draw attention to the group. You're asking me if I have that.
Yeah, I'm asking you if we have that, and then if we have that, and we're able to modify that for different types of problem sets, and we can use that, give that.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't have that, but could you construct that? What would it look like?
That would, that's a little difficult for me to articulate.
Right, but what? Right. I think that's right. And so, in fact, one thing you could do, one of the more obvious things you can do is simply tell people, look, what we want to do is get as many categories as possible, right? I mean, what's that? And maybe even put some time frames around it. Let's maximize the number of categories. So even bringing this finding to the group and saying, this is how we're going to get stuck, let's avoid it, will probably increase people's ability to focus on divergent categories. Okay? So here are a couple things that I would suggest. Build in periods of silence, right, as you suggested initially. Look in opposite directions, right? Ask something one way, ask it completely the opposite way. Ask open-ended questions. What if? And I'm guessing some of those ideas you came up with, the ray gun, right? I mean, I'm guessing that came up from a pretty open-ended question. Just guessing, right? Switch roles, right? So here's what people in engineering versus marketing ought to do, right? What would this look like from your vantage? You be the marketing person this time, and you see what it looks like, right? Consider impossibilities, right? Which, again, I think a number of you did when you were doing your pooper scooper brainstorming. Create organizational memory to avoid reinventing the wheel. So, right, you want to put some organizational parameters around this. Invite newcomers in who aren't captured by the inertia of the group. And limber up mentally. This is kind of like your idea, which is do some free association kinds of exercises before you even get going. Right? So these are all some ways of improving or optimizing on brainstorming. But of course, brainstorming is only one of many techniques you can use when thinking about developing creative ideas. So let's talk about a couple of others. In our work, what we found when we've been looking at these high-tech firms that have been buffered from the economic downturn, we find that these firms in particular focus more on supporting risk-taking and new ideas than other firms. They reward and recognize people for coming up with new ideas. They expect people to challenge the status quo. And I know you've heard people say that before, right? Oh, yeah, we do that too, right? But doing that for real is actually a whole different ballgame, right? Because what's the first thing someone's going to say to you? I come to Hazel and I say, Hazel, I know we've been doing it this way for a long time, and I know you were the person who actually came up with the original way that we do this, but let's do it a different way. What's Hazel's first response going to be? This was my idea. What's wrong? Is it not working? Right? It's very, very difficult for people to pull away from the defensiveness of the status quo. Even though most of the time, the reason why we're suggesting new ideas is not because the idea wasn't good at one point in time, but because times have changed and we need different solutions. And things can always get a little bit better. Unless people believe that management holds positive attitude about change, people aren't going to engage in risk-taking. When people feel comfortable engaging in conflict and actually having an honest debate about the idea. When people are given frequent constructive feedback about their work, and when there are processes in place for airing new ideas and dispensing with those that don't work. These are some attributes that we found characteristic of these organizations that had more innovative cultures. And so at Nokia, they say, for us, teamwork isn't a vision of great harmony. We expect our people to come up with their own views and fight for them. And Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, you know, he actually is 5. A lot of companies are set up so that people judge each other on failure, right? But he's got the wisdom of someone a lot wiser than his chronological age. A lot of companies are set up so people judge each other on failure. I don't worry about making things look good if they're actually not. So many companies just get so worried about looking like they might make a mistake that they get afraid to take any risks. We definitely fight. We expect our people to be passionate, and they're going to fight to make the case. Right? I mean, it's almost identical language, right? Or Michael Dell at Dell Computers, he says, sometimes I'm taken aback when I talk to people who've been in the company for 6 months or a year and who talk about the model as if it were an all-powerful being that will take care of everything. It's scary because I know that nothing's ever 100% constant. And the last thing we should do is assume that we're always going to be doing well, right? So a second set of norms that tend to go along with this innovative culture is once you ask people to take risks, you have to be ready to accept the kind of failure rate that goes along with that, because the failure rate is high. There's no way around that, right? Mistakes are a normal part of the innovation process. People are given the freedom to make changes. People are not allowed to stay back and not undertake any risk. And they feel psychologically safe to take well-intentioned risks and, I would argue, to learn from those failures. So, for example, I thought this was so interesting. A journalist who was observing the Simpson writing team, right? He said, most of the jokes and ideas proffered by the writers at the table provoked no reaction whatsoever. Polite laughter is considered counterproductive, right? The atmosphere was less that of a comedy club than of a high school classroom in which none of the students have done the assigned readings. Evidence that the toughest audience for a comedian is a room full of other comedians, right? These people took their comedy very seriously, and we're not just going to try to make you feel better if something is not funny, right? Or Ed Catmull, who's the founder of Pixar, says, if you want to be original, you have to accept the uncertainty even when it's uncomfortable, and have the capability to recover when your organization takes a big risk and fails. And actually, one of the most important practices at Pixar is that you have to show your work every day, right? You have to get up and show people what you did that day. And so people get used to the imperfections of, right, the creative process, right? And all the fits and starts that go along with it. Then, back in the animation department at Disney, years ago, they used to engage in something called the Gong Show. The Gong Show. Any of you who were watching really bad television in the 70s probably remember, right, the Gong Show. And I think that for reasons I don't understand, I think they brought the Gong Show back again for a limited time last year. I just caught a whiff of it, and wow, it was bad then, it is worse now, right? This was an amateur talent show, and the setup was, I guess it's like all these American Idols and all the rest of it without text, right? You get up and you basically get to do your kind of crappy song or dance act until the audience voted to gong you off the stage, or judges or whatever. So at Disney, the way they work this is, in the animation department, you stand up at a meeting and you basically pitch your idea until the group votes to gong you off. So Why would you do that? What is the psychology behind something like that? Why would you engage in such a practice? Why would you do it? What do you think? You get so comfortable with failure that it doesn't faze you anymore. That's exactly right, right? In fact, so what happens? First of all, you now created a venue for presenting those ideas, right? Second, everyone has to go. Everyone takes a turn. Third, what are the odds that you're going to be gonged off? You should pretty much expect to be gonged off, I don't know, every time, right? Which is realistic given the innovation pipeline, right? The pipeline needs to look like this in order for you to identify the one core idea that you're actually going to consider taking to commercial development, right? So the psychological reason for engaging in a practice like this is if people are devastated by failure, and failure is defined as, oh my God, you didn't commercialize my idea, right? You are out of the game. You need people to be willing to try again and again and again so that that pipeline is what it needs to be in order to find the good kernel, the good idea. So this is a way of getting people comfortable with failure. So do I recommend that on your way home you stop at Pier 1 and buy yourself a gong? I don't know, right? You have to figure out what specific practice would work for your organization to make sure that people are feeling comfortable expressing those ideas out loud. At the same time, there's two things you don't want to do. One is you don't want people pursuing idea areas that you're actually not going to be very interested in. So you can focus people's creative efforts in domains that are actually realistic for you to pursue. Two, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time doing the thumbs up, thumbs down in considering ideas. You need these approaches at the front end to be very, very efficient, right? Very, very efficient. Thumbs up, thumbs down. We hit the gong, you're out of here, right? It's efficient and it happens, okay? What many organizations do is they get into the idea of expressing creative ideas, but then they worry about hurting people's feelings, so they entertain the idea much longer than is useful. And it's just not helpful for anybody, right? Okay, so we've talked about cultivating creative ideas. The second piece of the innovation equation is getting those ideas implemented. So what do we mean by that? Now we're talking about getting those ideas into practice. And in the first round, what we're talking about is cultivating creativity requires pushing people to take risks and recognizing the level of failure that's going to occur. The sets of norms that seem to be relevant for the implementation piece are actually pretty different. Now we need people to work effectively as a team, and we need to them to work in an urgent, kind of efficient fashion. Okay? And there are sets of norms associated with these as well. What's interesting is there was a study done a couple of years ago by my colleagues Dave Caldwell and Charles O'Reilly. And what they did was they looked at a set of Silicon Valley firms, and they independently got assessments of the innovativeness of those firms. They used patent citation counts. They used industry experts' evaluations of the firm's innovativeness, and they used proportion of products that had been developed within the last 2 years of revenue. And so they had pretty good metrics on innovation. There's no sort of perfect measure of this. And what they did was they went in and they looked at the extent to which these organizations emphasized these sets of norms that we've been talking about. Support for risk-taking and change, tolerance for mistakes that are the ones that cultivate creativity, urgency and speed, teamwork that are ones that have to help with implementing creativity. Now, if you look at this, the first thing you note is that the more innovative firms are higher across the board on all of the norms. But which dimension differentiates most between more and less innovative organizations? Right? Urgency and speed. And which differentiates least? Teamwork. that means? What do you think that means? How would you interpret that? Yeah. You got to have a core group of people, small core group of people who are willing to push an idea through on their own initiative. And some talent. Why does this tell you that? Okay, all right. Yeah, what do you think? How fast you get feedback, right? And in fact, we're going to talk in a moment about IDEO, which is all about rapid prototyping, right? And the faster you do it, the more you get feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down, right? And you can kind of move on. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, trust me. Yeah, yeah. Totally relevant, valid points. Right. Yeah, yeah. Totally valid point. Though, right, to the extent that these were actually firms in a similar competitive space, they were able to control out some of those issues, but great points. I mean, what if we took this as given, and what if we took it as potentially representative of what things would look like in other industries? I think one way, right, the ideas that you've had are, I think, right on track, and one way that you'd want to think about this is, okay, I'm going to say it here, teamwork is overrated, right? And that's what this is saying. It's saying, look, to the extent, and this is way over-interpreting these data, but, you know, indulge me, right? Right? To the extent that we equate teamwork with consensus, right? It's the same thing we were talking about, convergence rather than divergence. To the extent that we equate teamwork with consensus, which many people do, you would be surprised, right? We are going to take longer to get anything out the door. And I think waiting is overrated because, frankly, if you get a couple people who are willing to push that idea out, whether or not you've got consensus, and by the way, have you ever been to that meeting where you walked away and said, oh, we got 100% consensus? Have you been to that meeting? I have never been to that meeting. Never. Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah. 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 So, you know, I mean, that's a great point because the whole reason you'd want to pull a group together in the first place, right? Why would we bother doing anything in teams at all? Well, the reason is because expertise is distributed. And the idea is somehow by bringing a team together, you're going to get a better solution to a more complex problem. That's absolutely the benefit. What I'm suggesting is that the pendulum has swung a little bit too far. I think organizations are doing everything in teams and have had this way of equating teamwork with consensus that is not good. Because teamwork can actually mean, at Intel, right, constructive confrontation, ferocious arguing with one another, and we're still on the team, right? So what I'm asking you to do is be more judicious in how you think about teamwork. Teamwork doesn't mean consensus, right? And I'm also arguing that you might not want to wait quite so long to get going on a new idea. Consider it a prototype. Consider it a pilot test, right? Don't try to convince everyone before you go. It may be that the proof is in the pudding. And if the idea works, people will come along with it. And if it doesn't, well, then you're not going to pursue it anyway. Right? I think organizations are waiting too long to gain a kind of consensus that actually will really never emerge anyway. Right? Yeah.
I really agree with your about teamwork and consensus. And I also think, though, that maybe we haven't taught people to do effective teamwork that would really help a lot. And IDEO, I think, is a great example of that. In their rapid prototyping, they use the team really effectively.
Right.
Maybe, so I know quantitative data often can overlook things like that.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in qualitative data as you go into it on that teamwork.
Right.
See if, in fact,
What it looks like.
maybe, in fact, we should not be saying do less teamwork, but figure out how
A different kind.
like IDEO or others.
Right. Well, and in fact, the idea of the brainstorm that we did, the modified brainstorm that we ended up suggesting is exactly that. So you are going to have a team, but you're going to watch for really pushing up the level of divergent categories, and you may have a quiet time initially where we're not together as a team, right? So I think that's exactly right, getting much more specific about what we mean by teamwork and fitting the type of teamwork to the task at hand, right? Great point. Okay, so you mentioned IDEO. So the others of you, what have you seen really work out there? What have you been struck by in terms of an innovative group?
Small teams usually work better than large teams, especially for software development, pair programming. So this is something that.
Why do you think that is?
Because usually you have the small team feels that he owns the idea, and 100% of the execution depends on their
Yeah.
on their effort.
So high level of responsibility, yeah. Yep. Yeah, good, yeah. Yep. It's a great explanation.
Smaller groups tend to trust one another faster.
Now, do you see how we've converged on the idea of small groups, right? It's great. It's great building on the idea of small groups, right? No, I mean, it's so compelling that we do it without even really noticing. Great point. Our flexibility score is not going up with your comment, however, so. So really high visibility. Right. Yep. Yeah. Please.
So one of the most innovative groups I've seen is where the diversity is high. So for example, in this company, we would have once a month a hack day where everybody from the accountant to finance to everybody in the company to form teams, diverse teams, and a lot of good ideas came in that way.
Yeah. So diversity with respect to functional background, right? I mean, this is a great point. The point is there's all kinds of diversity, right? And some of the, we tend to default to some of the most easy to spot versions of diversity, you know, race, sex, age, height, which has dogged me my whole life, right? All right? I mean, right? And in fact, there are all kinds of other cuts that are really interesting, that are terrific to mix up in terms of functional background, product orientation, geographic location, time that you tenure in the organization, right? These things can create hugely different perspectives on things and are worth being very conscious about mixing up. Great idea. Yeah.
So sort of three techniques. One is the diversity one that actually prevents people from outside. In small groups, we're using some techniques that actually unionize relationships very quickly so that they have strong
Yeah. Right, right. So we have great convergence on that. We're really close to our time. 3 of the most creative organizations I've seen, and this is a weird list, right? I mean, Google seems like that would have been on everybody's list maybe up to last year or something. Google's so, 2008. No, it's not true. 3M, which is big and old, for goodness sake, why are they on the list? And then IDEO, which is this crazy product development company. But IDEO has had an enormous impact because IDEO is not just developing products, but they're actually training organizations to be more creative. So just, do you have just one more minute? Can I tell you a little bit about these? So innovation at 3M is everywhere all the time. And if you look at the attributes associated with innovation, you would unmistakably see that if you want to stay innovative as you get bigger and older, you have to have a comprehensive focus on it. So well, where would I even... You know that the whole founding story of Post-it notes at 3M is based on the idea that it was actually supposed to be all the way sticky. Right? This was supposed to be an adhesive for asphalt shingles, which I'm guessing you don't want like falling off your, oh, let's put this one over here, right? Or we could put this one on the fridge, right? You don't want that to happen. So the chemists who failed miserably for asphalt shingles went over and pitched the idea to the office products group within 3M. And the fact that there was even a pathway for doing that is notable, right? So there are these defiant role models. There's a notion of grow and divide, right? We don't have to stay within certain realms. There's something called the 30% rule. 30% of our revenue must come from products that have been developed within the last 3 years. There's an expectation that you're going to do some bootlegging. You can take up to 15% of your time to do so. I mean, many of these are very well-known practices now. But I think 3M is still a very interesting example of a big old company that continues to be consistently innovative. You could argue that they've been routinely innovative. Google, geez, everybody is talking about Google. Again, the thing I would say about Google is that it's not just 1 or 2 practices here or there. It is a deep commitment to innovation and a set of practices that are consistent and comprehensive around that, including how people pool ideas and efforts, how people take individual initiative to get resources for their idea. If the idea gets to a certain point, you have to start talking people into helping you with it. And then you can get funding from Marissa Mayer. The idea the time allocation breakdown, 70% of your time should be spent on core issues, 20% on pursuits related to the core, 10% on far out ideas. We actually want you to dedicate genuine time in that regard. Their selection approaches are consistent with this hiring for creative people. In fact, if you were driving on Highway 101 south, just south of San Francisco, about a year ago, you would have seen a billboard that had what's in brackets here. First 10-digit prime found in consecutive digits of E, right? And if you had actually .com, if you had actually gone to that site, right, with the answer, right, this is the answer, you would have been invited to interview at Google, right? That was the site that came up. Please come and interview with us, right? So you get that, right? That's their selection device. They are looking for people who are interested in puzzles like this, right? Get that? So if you want people who are going to resonate in an innovative organization, get people who are interested in doing free association games and who view problem solving as a puzzle and so forth. And then finally, when you think about an organization like IDEO, which has made a slew of interesting products these days, they've won 346 design awards, 1,000 patents. They still only have 500 employees, and only make about $100 million a year in revenue, which is not big by big company standards, but they've had a huge impact. And I would say that their success factors boil down to the two themes we've been talking about today. Coming up with creative ideas, and they stick very closely to the brainstorming guidelines with some of the optimizations that we've talked about. You know, build on the ideas of others, one conversation at a time, stay focused on the topic, encourage wild idea, be visual, go for quantity. So they like to get things three-dimensional as quickly as possible. And then this notion of rapid prototyping. Enlightened trial and error outperforms the planning of flawless intellect. Iterate, act with the best knowledge available, note the failures and successes, revise and act again, sketch it, get it three-dimensional as quickly as possible. So move on it, right? That's really what they're about. So if you think about the lessons there, I think they're sort of consistent with the state of the knowledge on innovation. Organize for rapid design iterations so you get those ideas out there and trialed quickly. Fail early, but avoid the huge mistakes, and you can do that by anticipating the whole process, right? That was a great idea suggested. Leverage the value of early information. Solving problems early is less expensive and faster than doing so later. So, here's what David Kelly says, and I think it illustrates the title of this session very nicely. So he said he had an epiphany in 2003 when he noticed clients not calling IDEO's approach design and instead calling it design thinking. I'm not a words person, but in my life it's the most powerful moment that words or labeling ever made, because then it all makes sense. Now I'm an expert at methodology rather than a guy who designs a new car or a new chair. And here I think this is really telling. I really do believe I was put on the planet to help people have creative confidence. I don't have 27 agendas. I'm not the sustainability guy or the developing world guy. My contribution is to teach as many people as I can to use both sides of their brain so that for every problem, every decision in their lives, they consider creative as well as analytical solutions. This, in my mind, encapsulates the innovative leader. Innovative leaders create a context in which people are encouraged and empowered to generate creative ideas and implement them. Thank God, this means you don't have to be the smartest or creative person in the room. In fact, it's better if you're not, right? Because you can leash other people's efforts and have them take responsibility for it. Innovative leaders put new ideas to work in every element of their organization. My guess is the person who talked about the cross-functional hacker meetings, right? You're coming up with all kinds of process improvement and all kinds of good ways of doing things within the organization. Innovative leaders are the source of growth for society. They are going to be leading the organizations that define what's next, and that's what your Haas MBA is all about. Yes. Yes, that's right. That's what we're doing. You guys go do it. Go do it. Thank you. Thanks for coming. It's great to see you. Hope to see you back real soon. Thanks for